All right, welcome to another live. I've been trying to do these more often. I know I probably should plan them in advance instead of just throwing them out there, but I've been doing impromptu ones. I do a stream with video games on Saturdays, which is typically when I'm doing these lives, and I also play Dungeons and Dragons. So I'll be playing that in about an hour here. So this is going to be a little bit of a shorter live. But one of the things that keeps coming up is this whole idea of evil, right? Everyone's like evil, and you'll hear individuals who are Christian saying that non-Christians are evil. You'll hear individuals who are not Christian saying that Christians are evil. And I not only think it needs to stop, but I think that there is a hypocrisy going on, especially in the New Age movements. So there's folks that proclaim themselves as being, oh, they're pagan or heathen or polytheist. And there's a plethora of names and identities within this umbrella term of modern neo-paganism. And regardless of the one that you choose, I'm noticing that a lot of people that seek out modern neo-paganism in any of its incarnations tend to be individuals who started out as being Christian, and for some reason something didn't feel right, so they chose to leave. And this could be various reasons, whether it be the teachings didn't make sense to them, maybe they just weren't devout and it was just generalized, maybe they randomly came across something that had to do with polytheism, maybe they were introduced to it by a TV show or a movie or a game, or they picked up a book on it, or they met someone who had an interesting symbol and they asked them about it. There's a lot of reasons that people get into polytheism, but most of the folks that I've run across, whether it be online or in person, tend to be individuals who did not start out as being polytheistic or pagan. It's people who have discovered it later in life, and it's usually for some form of self-empowerment. They're seeking to have their own personal connection with whatever divinity is, and they're trying to become more empowered themselves. Hello, Fadista. Hello, Dave. I'm not sure I believe in evil as such. I believe in malevolent energies, which is filled with enough emotion or belief can manifest itself in physical ways. Thus, we have the concept of demons. I do agree with you. I don't think that evil exists. And already people who do believe in good and evil are like, ah, ha, ha, ha. That's what someone who is evil would say. I think evil is a perception, right? What is good for you and beneficial to you in life is good. What is not, what is harmful, is evil. And I think that in most cases, society can agree on certain evils. For example, any harm towards children, I think we can all agree, is evil. A harm towards another living being is, I think, people get on the fence about. And people might be like, wait a minute, Blaze, no, all that is evil. Are you sure? Do you eat meat? Oh, well, I mean living beings as in other humans. Because again, perception is going to color that. But if you talk to someone who is a vegan or a vegetarian, they would consider physical harm to any animal, and in consuming its corpse, that's what you're doing, as evil. So again, what is evil and what is good is perception based. If you look at wars, take any of the wars in history and look at the side people are fighting for. If they're choosing to fight that war, they believe what they are doing is just and that they're good, and their side is the good side, and the people they're fighting against is bad. And that's for both sides. I'm not going to start naming out wars, and I'm not going to get into the specifics of arguing or debating over the reasons to fight war, because I think war itself is a horrible thing, and I think the idea of war is pretty bad. But I think the term evil is thrown around too much. Now, specifically with this topic here, hey, Pagan Coffee Talk, welcome. This particular topic I wanted to bring up specifically because of the hypocrisy I'm seeing in people who are becoming New Age. They're becoming pagan or heathen, and they are finding this later in life because people are looking for empowerment. And I would, again, assess it yourself. Were you yourself raised in some sort of polytheistic New Age path? And if you weren't, do you know anyone who was raised? I have met, and not like I know everyone in the entire world. When I've come across people, I have met 2 individuals who would be considered a second generation, and their parents were also of this path or persuasion. One of them claimed to be a 3rd generation witch. They swore up and down that their grandmother taught them and their mother taught them. Their mother seemed like she was kind of in some of the openness to some of the New Age stuff, but I'm not sure if they were actually a third generation witch. And then another person I knew, and their son, they were raising them the same way that they believed. But I noticed that a lot of people tend to steer away and look for their own path in many situations. And the vast majority of individuals I've met are self-taught through books, or they'll take courses if they're available. That's fine. But the reason that gets them to start looking is because they tend to have something in their original path that doesn't fit right for them. Something didn't make sense. That was my case. I was raised Christian. Didn't feel right for me for various reasons. So I started looking. And I think that seems to be a commonality. The thing that I think is unique and distinct, though, is I've noticed that there is a tendency for people to instantly attack Christians and say they're evil. I'll hear stuff like Christians are judgmental, Christians force their faith on you, and Christians assume everything is evil that's not Christian. Even though I think there are examples of that. I've seen them, I've heard of them. I don't think it's the norm. And maybe it's my limited view from the world I grew up in. But I can tell you right now, some of the nicest people I've ever met in life are Christian. I've met Christians. Oh, got some more comments. Fadista says, I think the human brain has a tendency to psychotherapy, maybe from survival needs, which can look like what many call evil. I agree. I think it's a survival instinct. If there is danger involved, people instinctually label that and try to steer clear of it. And I think with religion, spirituality, and philosophy, that's very true. If you think that that is harmful for your spiritual well-being, you will steer away from it and warn other people to stay away from it as well. But I guess the main thing I'm trying to get to with what I'm saying here is people are bad. I don't think religions are. I'm sure there's some exceptions, but the vast majority of spiritualities out there try to teach some form of morality and spiritual guidance. And I think that the occasional, there will be mindsets that they teach where they victimize the followers, but I don't think that's the norm. I really don't. And some of the Christians that I have met, like I said, some of the nicest people I've met don't push their religion down other people's throats. Even though I feel like Christianity was started out of lies and control. To clarify what I mean by that is, if you look back to some of the origins of Christianity and where it started, as far as I can tell, they started out with the Dead Sea Scrolls. There were several scrolls and writings, and there supposedly was something referred to as, I believe, the Council of Nicaea, where they actually sat down a group of individuals and tried to decide what they would put and include in the Bible, what stories were good enough to include, and it was from a variety of faiths. It wasn't just a single faith. It was a combination of different faiths. It was written down in a book which became the Bible, and I believe the original was either in, I thought, Aramaic or Hebrew, and then they shared it with other people, and people have been fighting over that book for hundreds of years now. So I think it has a rough origin, but Christians today, the ones that I've known, tend to use it as a way of treating other people humanely. They treat it as a moral code and use it as a moral compass to be a good person. And I have met people that don't judge, don't bring it up. Now, if you ask them about it, they'll bring it up. What I don't like is the fact that people are now targeting Christians and they're attacking them. Oh, they're cruel and they're judgmental. They're literally doing everything they accuse Christians of doing just by being Christian, which again, individual Christians, sure. All Christians, I don't agree with that. I don't think all Christians fall into this all-encompassing judgmental evil pushing their religion, even though this type of people exist. But to turn around and say, I'm leaving Christianity because it does X, Y, and Z, and now you start doing it to others that are Christian because you experienced it, to me is like you're doing a mirror thing. You are literally doing the same thing. And I don't think there's justification in targeting anyone for their belief system. I personally feel like each person needs to find their own spiritual path and what feels right to them. And I think sharing is great. I think sharing resources, I think sharing knowledge, I think sharing how you go about your approach and your discovery of divinity is fine, as long as you're not harming people. Those people that do push it on you, I don't like pushing. People have a tendency to go door to door and knock and tell you, like, hey, you know, let's talk about our Lord and Savior and whatnot. And people get really frustrated with these people because they're invading your personal space. But if you look at it from their point of view, they genuinely believe in their spirituality, and they feel like you're going to be damned to hell. One of the worst things that can happen to you for eternity if they don't come and try to help you find what they believe is the Word of God. They're doing it out of a place of kindness. But there's a balance there, right? There's a balance between offering and harassment. So there's a balance between opening yourself to others and allowing them to come in and trying to force it on them. So I do think that being judgmental and forcing your faith on people is wrong. And the ones that do that, I think those individuals should be held accountable for their actions, not just because they're Christian. What else I mean is people have a tendency to roll their eyes at different things. So not to get too personal, but recent funeral of someone I knew, there was a family member who was not Christian. Most of the family was Christian, and they wanted to do numerous ceremonies because this individual was very open-minded to different paths. And they did a ceremony that would be very polytheistic in nature, I would say. Felt very polytheistic to me. And they did another ceremony that was specifically Catholic because this individual had been raised Catholic and had explored different faiths. During the graveside rites that were Catholic, one of the family members was kind of loudly scoffing and making a big deal of it and ruining the moment for the other people. That didn't add anything. Taking a moment to have a ceremony that other people are participating in and interrupting it because of your own narrow-minded point of view is literally the type of stuff that people complain and leave Christianity for. And to me, that makes that individual just as bad. If you're leaving because you don't like the judgments, if you're leaving because you don't like that they're trying to push, but then you go around and do the same thing, if you're doing the same actions with different ammunition, it's still the same actions. And that's what I'm trying to get to here with this whole good versus evil. We don't like it when we are exploring different paths and faiths, when we are looking into different spirituality. We don't like it when people call us evil, when we know it's not evil, right? We know we're exploring, we're trying to educate ourselves, and we're trying to become empowered in our own spiritual journey. So for other individuals to not understand the path that we're on, to judge it, and to judge us just because of our choice to explore is insulting, frustrating, and can lead to unnecessary animosity, especially if it turns into some sort of physical assault, which it has happened before. But to flip that around and do those same actions to other individuals is just as bad. There is no justification for the judgment and harassment of other people when you talk about something that is non-tangible. We're talking about an ethereal experience, an exploration of the mind and the being of existence and how you fit in with things. I don't care how old your religion is. I don't care if you invented it yesterday. I don't care if it's 100 years old. I don't care if it's been practiced for thousands of years. I genuinely believe none of us have the answer. None of us know, and we are all exploring and finding what feels right. And what else do you have to go out off of besides that inner voice, that conscience, that higher self, as we sometimes call it, that higher self, that awareness that kind of leads us and guides us? That's all we have to go off of. And many times you'll have people that seem crazy. And that's the other thing that's mind-blowing to me is you have people who believe, and then you have fanatics. And you have some of these people that are so focused on, this is the only way because God told me so. Some people are genuinely thinking that they heard the voice of God. How do you know you're hearing the voice of God? Because I've heard the argument from Christians before that, oh, well, you were led this way because a pagan deity reached out to you. That's Satan, or that's a demon. You're being led astray. How do you know? You're claiming your God is all-powerful and omniscient. Who are you to say how it appears? And I've discussed similar things in other lives and videos before, but it really comes back to the same thing constantly with what I'm trying to get across is we are exploring and we are experiencing And the way that we're interpreting it, to me, feels no different than how you choose to dress or style yourself, or the types of foods you choose to consume, right? Consuming food gives you a type of nourishment. What you eat, what tastes right to you, what does your body need, what sort of conditions are you going through? Like, are you diabetic? Can you not have sugar? Like, are you a vegetarian, or there's restrictions to your diet? Those types of things, to me, translate in a similar way to the spiritual journey. You're looking for spiritual nourishment. You don't know for sure. You just eat what tastes good to you, and you don't know how it's genuinely affecting you until years later, until you assess it. Now, with food, we have science to dig into and see what the effects are. With spirituality, we don't have that to go off of. And unfortunately, with spirituality, you can sometimes go down these rabbit holes of crazy. What separates someone who is actually crazy and deserves, or I don't know if anyone deserves, should be in an insane asylum because of how just nuts some of the things they are saying are. I remember this show, talking about fiction again. I remember this show when I was younger. It was called Angels in the Outfield. And this kid prayed to God and then started hearing and seeing angels. And he went to this sports team because his dad said he would return when the Angels win the pennant. So he hears these angels that start appearing and helping the baseball players to win the sporting game because he prayed for help with it. And they start accusing the coach of being crazy and about to fire him because he's listening to this kid who claims to be seeing and hearing angels. And he is the only one in the whole movie who is hearing and seeing these angels. But one of his grandma, his aunt, I can't remember who she was anymore, she brings up the fact that everyone's calling him crazy and saying it's bad. But no one has a problem when a football player makes a touchdown and goes down to one knee and thanks God for making that football, right? But this kid sees angels and he's crazy. And it, even though it's fictional, it paints this picture of the way that we get hypocritical in our viewpoints of when we come to religion and spirituality. How do we really know it's right? And how do we know if we're crazy or not? That's a constant question we ask ourselves when we have a supernatural or religious experience. How do we know if that really happened? I've talked to people who have the ability to claim the ability to, because I don't know how to confirm it, claim the ability to see and feel beings that don't actually physically exist. Non-corporeal beings. Astral entities. How do we know we're actually feeling or sensing or seeing those? So if we feel like we have that ability, how do we know we're actually tapping into that, or if it's not our minds playing tricks on us? Where do we balance that? Let me get back to chat. I'm sorry. I appreciate the interaction, and I'm going off on this little tirade here. I think Christians are the most targeted people in the world right now. Christians historically will not allow the state to be their God, and govern doesn't like that. Government doesn't like that. Right. And that's why I'm speaking up about this right now. Because I grew up as an individual who chose a different faith, 16, 17. I was young. I was a teenager. I was raised Roman Catholic. It didn't feel right. I had some instances that made me want to look elsewhere, so I did. Some of the answers I was getting from the local church just didn't make sense to me, so I wanted to start seeking elsewhere, and I've been looking elsewhere ever since, and I've kind of found my own way. So, for me at least, I got targeted a lot and had to keep it quiet. We had a big thing back in the 90s when I was growing up, because I was born in 81. But back in the 90s, this is pretty much when I was a teenager and growing up and stuff. And basically back then, we were about keep silent. There's a book, one of my first introductions to witchcraft, which is by Ed Fitch. It's called A Grimoire of Shadows. And they have the 4 words of the Magus: to know, to dare, to will, to keep silent. To keep silent is for multiple reasons. First of all, you can get targeted if you put it out there. Second of all, keeping what you do secret doesn't allow people to counter it. If you be really loud about how you do things, then people could counter that or mess with it, right? So keeping it silent and keeping it secret gives it power. That's the idea, and the concept behind that is keeping that. Not to mention too that you want to let things go. If you're doing energy work, if you're doing spell work, one of the teachings they have in a lot of these books and a lot of different paths that I've studied is you do your spell work and then you let it go. Because if you hold on to it and focus on it, you're keeping those energies back. So one method that is used in modern witchcraft, or at least the way it was introduced to me, is you create a circle. And a circle is where a orb above and below touches the surface of the earth. You build your energies in there and you release them. And then you don't think about it anymore, so that that energy can go out and do its work. So you have stuff like that. And it's just the idea of keeping it silent for safety is something none of us liked. We were fighting for acceptance to find what works for us in our own path. We weren't fighting to become the new superpower in the world and to take over Christianity. At least I wasn't fighting for that. And I don't think everyone else was either. But it's sad to me that now that pagans are getting in power, in some cases, anyone that's non-Christian, it seems like, they are now targeting Christians like they claimed Christians targeted them. So again, if you're going to pick out the few Christians that were bad and took it to a bad place, and you're now going to hold everyone with the label of Christian accountable, how is that any different from what we went through in the 90s? And I'm only talking about the 90s because that's where I grew up through. You know, I was born in 81, so I grew up through the 90s as a teenager coming into adulthood and stuff. So for me, at least, I lived it firsthand. I knew what it was like. I'm not reading about it. I experienced it. And again, being someone who started to find my own path and to fall into those categories and start getting Llewellyn books and reading and teaching and talking with other people, I experienced it firsthand from other people. And I was fortunate that my family rolled their eyes at me instead of targeting me for it. My family was very good about it, all things considered. I've heard of families disowning their children over converting away from the family faith. But now that we have the norm, it seems like it's okay and acceptable to target Christians. You are literally doing the same thing to Christians that were done to the people exploring these New Age paths. Like how hypocritical is that? Like, how is it okay and acceptable if it was wrong back then? If you take out the words, take out the names of the religion, but take the actions only, it's the same freaking actions in reverse. That doesn't make it okay. Sorry, Dave. You said that's why the God force in the heavens gave us an individuality, our own perception, a free will, so that we could find for ourselves what way spirituality will manifest for us. I agree with that. I like that. That is a very good point, Dave. I like that a lot, actually. Jay Woodwolf. Hey, dude. Good to see you. Same 81. Definitely agree. That's all I'm trying to get at. And I want to put this out there because I want folks to start thinking about this. To get away and try to not make it the norm to just bash on Christianity. Honestly, I think it would be better for society as a whole, regardless of religion, if it was not reflexively okay to target anyone for their religion. Target them for their actions. If somebody is going to do something and treat others poorly, respond to that. These prejudgments based upon the idea of they're this or that doesn't help. And I'll tell you right now, I've been guilty of this. I have had so many bad run-ins with self-proclaimed pagans lately. I have stopped using the term pagan to label myself maybe about 5 or 6 years ago. And I actually have a bad reaction. And I try to push past it. But my reflexive reaction is if someone says that they're pagan, I roll my eyes instantly. I'm like, oh, here we go again. Because I'm seeing it be so common that these people are like, oh, I'm this or that. Back in the 90s, everyone was Wiccan or a witch. That was the thing. Oh, you have a pentagram, and I'm going to put a big pentagram on my neck, and every time I talk about my book, it's my grimoire. It's my book of shadows. Oops. Oh, by the gods. They would really make it loud, and we would call them fluff bunnies back in the 90s. But they were really trying to push and make it this scene versus just following it, and a lot of them stopped practicing after a while. A lot of them grew up and gave it up. That's the other thing I think is interesting. People jump into this, and they'll be like, oh, that's just a phase. I can't tell you how many people I've known who dived into paganism in the 90s to just turn around and give it up and either become an atheist or go back to Christianity. It happens a lot. Especially, I've noticed this with women specifically. Women are looking for the self-empowerment. They get into witchcraft. They buy all these Llewellyn books, and then they get married, and their husband's a Christian because back, at least where I grew up, it was more common for women to be witches than it was for men, even though I did find the occasional male witch. And they get married and they give it up for their spouse because their spouse rolls their eyes about it and they're either not religious at all or Christian. So then they're like, oh, I'm going to give it up and I'm going to put that part of myself aside, either burning their spell books, sticking it on a shelf, letting it get dusty. They just give up their practice altogether. It's like in the moment when they're solitary and they don't have a household structure, then they're exploring this and trying to look for power. Then they get the structure of the family unit and the household, and they feel like they no longer need that ability or power anymore, so they put it aside. Now, today, Norse paganism is the big thing. Everyone's a Norse pagan now. You hear it all the time. And at least I am. Maybe I'm going to the wrong places online, but I'm constantly hearing these people say they're Norse pagan. And the worst part about it is, and again, this is that reaction. I should not have this reaction. I'm ashamed of myself for having this reaction, but I'm honest enough with myself to acknowledge it and to try to work through mental exercises of trying to move past it. I hear Norse pagan and I'm like, oh, here we go. Another person who watched Vikings that want to put on face paint. Because you see this hairstyle. They shave the sides of their heads. They do this braid like the show. That is not historically accurate at all. Who cares? It doesn't need to be historically accurate. They're finding something that works for them. Let them do it. Or you'll have this thing. Oh, I worship Loki. Loki was bad. Loki was not only one of the Jotun, but he caused tons of mischief. Oh, but for me, he's a trickster and a... So you're basically taking a deity and you're making it something different. Why? Probably because you liked how he was in the Marvel shows. It's like, people are taking stuff in name and looking for a label and filling it with what they want to fill it with, and it causes all this confusion. That's what started me doing all this resource stuff. Like, let me share resources. If you want to use a name that already exists, do the work. Find out where that came from. If not, do your own thing. But if you're going to mix them together and you're going to share it with other people, you're causing confusion. And then that causes all this animosity and infighting. You see that argument and this accusations and judgments inside the community of New Age just as much as you see it outside. Big time agree. I don't think Christians are evil, but they can be a bit too self-righteous and look down on people if you don't believe what they believe. Kind of gets annoying. The Dusty Dud, and that's an example. Yes, I have met people like that, but I've also met Christians who are not like that at all and are devout Christians. And that's the point I'm trying to get to. I agree with you. If someone did that, yeah, that person's a jerk. So treat that person that way. Not because they're Christian. Not, well, this person's a Christian, so they're doing this. If we move away from generalizations and try to do it based upon an individual. And I know learning is about learning, right? We have previous experiences, and as a defense mechanism, we use our past experiences and we bring it forward. So if we're seeing a commonality of being treated a certain way, and we notice the commonality is that they're Christian for these types of actions, it's hard not to put the association of the actions with Christians. It's just, I've seen both, right? I've seen Christians who get super angry, but I've seen really good ones too. The Southern Baptist guy that I'd worked with at previous jobs never brings up religion, but if you bring up religion, he'll go through Bible quotes with you. He'll talk about it all day, glow on his face. But he's also super friendly. He's nice. He's responsive, non-judgmental, doesn't push things. Great, great, great guy. My grandmother, first generation from Italy. So on my dad's side, my dad's mom, her older sister, and her parents immigrated from Italy. So she was the first generation in this country. And she was raised with Catholicism and very, very, very devout Catholic. But it was never a big thing. When we came over, sure, there's prayers during dinner when we had, when we were visiting and stuff. But it wasn't really pushed. But we knew that she went to regular Sunday services and that it was a big deal for her and her family, right? On her deathbed, last couple of months that she was alive, I had a conversation with her because she was always sweet, always smiling, always welcoming, always wanted you to feel like you were welcome in her home and that you had everything that you needed. You were fed, you had enough food. I told her that I had stopped being Catholic for many, many years and kind of found my own path. She smiled at me and she said, the only thing that matters is that you have faith in something, and thought it was wonderful that I found something that worked for me. This devout Catholic, right? To her grandson, just happy that I believed. That's what she thought was important, having a belief. Not what it was that I believed in, but having a belief that fulfilled me spiritually. That was the important aspect to her. That sticks with me. I've shared that story before. I will share it again because it had a deep meaning for me with a family of individuals that try to ignore the fact that I'm the one of the few, not the only, but one of the few in the family that's not a form of Christian. The fact that she was that accepting made my day. And I know not everybody's been that fortunate. Like I said, I know people have kicked people out of families for not being of the family faith. But Dave says, some years ago, there was this so-called Christian who every time he saw me in the streets would call out, "Hey, Satan," simply because I wore a pentagram. That stuff right there, that's the types of that's another example of those actions. I've seen that before. There is no excuse for that at all. That is wrong. What that person did to you is straight up harassment. It's cruel, and it's narrow-minded bigotry. Doesn't matter that they were Christian. That person was bad. I'm sorry you went through that. I could understand that being very uncomfortable and frustrating. Fidista said, in my early pagan years, early mid-'80s, I did reflexively bash Christianity. But in the real world, Christians I knew were not trying to oppress me or harm me, and I thought, why am I doing this? Yes. And I think, Fidista, I think a lot of people are becoming more enlightened, like you yourself did, where you opened yourself to the idea of maybe people are just people. Maybe they're more than just their spiritual views. And I think that it's become more of an issue today because of the internet. People are outspoken behind their keyboard more, and they get on these bandwagons. They become brainwashed with politics and religion and social issues, that they forget that at the end of the day, we're all just people trying to do the best we can in life. That's awesome that you turned that around. When I started out, when I first started looking into paganism, I did that too. I did a lot of this. A lot of the stuff that I'm advising people not do, I had done it before, because I left Christianity because it wasn't feeling right for me. So I'm like, oh, Christians, here goes Christians. And it's like, I realized I was being as bad as the people I was complaining about. So I wanted to put a stop to it. And I've done better. I still have a ways to go. I'm human, but I've done better. Brigadwell says, when neo-paganism focuses most of their energy bashing Christians, it just seems like they're insecure in their new path. Yes. That's actually a good point. That's a good point. If you were focused more on this animosity versus exploring and living and experiencing your new path, where are you putting your energy and your focus on? That's got to be damaging to the psyche and soul to have so much hatred built up in you. You know, those Christians aren't affected by you bubbling and destroying yourself from the inside with all that negativity. Dave Earl says, I have a real pet peeve with people who want to take elements of Wicca and mix in other stuff with their practice and still call it Wicca. I'm a purist, I guess. Am I wrong for thinking that way? I don't think so. And I've actually debated this many times myself. And I'm finding... So you see this with Christianity, Dave. You see how many different denominations there are. I mean, there's two main branches of Christianity, right? There is basically Catholics and Protestants, mostly. And everything else is like an umbrella term under one of those two large categories. And as I understand it, the biggest difference is Catholics believe that the power should be in the church and you have to go through the church to know God, whereas the Protestants believe you just need to read the Bible and interpret the Word of God, and you don't need a church, you just need God's Word. That's, I think, and I'm not being an expert on Christian mythology and stuff. I don't know all the details, but those are the two main camps from what I've seen. But there is a plethora of denominations. There's a YouTube video somewhere out here that talks about all the different denominations. There's like 30 plus. And those are just the high level ones that people know about. And I think you see the same thing when it comes to, like, even look at Wicca. You have Dianic Wicca, Alexandrian Wicca, British traditional Wicca, Gardanian Wicca, and you have all of these different versions. But going back to your point of having a pet peeve over that, I've actually started getting irritated with that as well, because I think this is what confuses people. If people are seeking out new age paths, so they go and say, oh, Wicca seems right for me, what book do you read? How do you know it's really Wicca? If people are making videos talking about how to do Wicca and they've made it their own thing, like Ed Fitch's Grimoire of Shadows, there are straight up things in that book that are Druid, that are Norse, and they're listed in a book about witchcraft. Why? I have other books here too. Wiccan Practices and Beliefs. Wicca, Guide for the Solitary Practitioner. And in these books here, you have all of these different practices that people are adapting. People are talking about chi, and they try to associate it with the life force without understanding the full concept of the three energies or the seven souls. But they're taking this from a different practice and incorporating it in. Or people using the word akasha, which is a Hindu word. You know, we have the tatwas, like I would mention the one time with the 5 elements, and the principles of the elements specifically coming from the Golden Dawn. And people are incorporating this stuff without seeing or saying where it comes from. And I get frustrated with that myself. I don't think that makes you a bad person. I don't think there's anything wrong with being a purist. Your view is, this is how I was taught. This is one path. And if other people are going to use it, I would like to see them acknowledge it or call it something different. I see nothing wrong with that. I study martial arts, and my teacher got so frustrated with people arguing over the details of, is this Kung Fu or is this Kali? And it's all these different arts, that he decided to scrap all that and create a new name for his own style and his own system. This way, he's no longer listening to people say, well, that's this, or that should be done this way. No, this is how I do this system. And I think the same thing, in my opinion, should apply to spirituality, right? If you're going to do something that is outside of the written path, why are you calling it that anymore? So many people I have met are eclectic because they have access to so much information online or through books. You don't necessarily need to stick with one path. But if you're going to sit here and incorporate different practices, acknowledge where those practices come from. So I see where you're coming from, and I don't think there's anything wrong with that, in my opinion. Again, that's just my view. The Dusty Dud, I'm pretty sure the pentagram used to be a Catholic symbol they used and used to use. Yes, I believe so too. And it's also Pythagoras, they used to meet in secret, talk about mathematics and different type of arcane practices, and they would put a pentagram on their hand as a symbol of being part of that Pythagorean order. Like, it's been used in multiple different usages through everywhere, and it's meant multiple things to different cultures. But people get narrow-minded and they focus on stuff. The other thing they don't seem to understand is when a saint, and that's the thing, there's different types of Satanists, right? You ever see the Anton LaVey's Satanic Bible? LaVey Satanism doesn't even believe in Satan as a being. It's a concept. It's a concept of living your life to your fullest, regardless of how it affects others. Doesn't mean you go out of your way to hurt others. You just go out of your way to get the most out of life. It's a lot different, but they're still Satanists. So what is even a Satanist, right? And then when people are using a pentagram for Satanism, it's typically inverted. You know, it has the 2 points upward. And in some cases, it represents the face of Baphomet, this goat-headed deity that has the jaw downward, the ears downward, and then the 2 horns upward. But that's only one representation of it, but it's still an inverted pentagram, whereas other people who use a pentagram, or sometimes they'll call it the pentacle because of the circle around it, always has the point up. But both of them are used in different forms of spirituality. And this is based upon personal experiences. I don't think I have a source. Actually, no, I do have a source. A Grimoire Shadows has this in there for sure. But they have both the pentagram up and the pentagram down, and it is meant for different purposes. The pentagram up is about expanding the energy outward. It's like a human being with their legs spread out and their arms spread out and their head to the sky, and they're radiating the energy outward. Now, with the pentagram downward, the tip downward, it's about bringing those elements in, and it's about invoking versus evoking. But we can get into that in separate videos. But the idea here is, even in paganism, the inverted pentagram has its usage. But if you're going to argue and say the pentagram is satanic because Satanists use that, you could argue the same thing for the cross. Oh, but the cross is inverted. Sorry, didn't mean to hit the mic. But they're still using the cross, but it's inverted. Okay, they're using the pentagram, which most of the people that are using the pentagram have it right side up. When it's inverted, then they're using it for satanic purposes. Why does that not apply to the cross? Seems like the same concept to me. And why are you so narrow-minded that everything is either Christian or satanic? Like, why can't we look at the spectrum of the world? To me, magic is like love. You feel it. You can't see it, you can't measure it. It's something you feel. How do you explain that to other people, what love is? You can try to describe it, but you have to experience it to really know what it is. So when you're going through spirituality, you go with those feelings. If it feels right, then that's working for you. And you don't know what other people are feeling, so focus on you and stop worrying so much about them. The only interaction you need to worry about from other people is when it actually interferes with your ability to live. That's just my 2 cents. Sorry, I'll get off my soapbox. Kevin Frazier, hey, welcome. Hello, my blood relatives disowned me because I'm not Christian. I walk the left-hand path. It has been 28 years, thanks. I am sorry to hear that. And I do know some people have gone through that experience, but to me, that is more because of your family. And again, judging them based upon the actions they did. I don't think it has to do with them being Christian, because Christianity doesn't necessarily teach people to disown people or to remove them from their lives. Likewise, as I'd mentioned, my family has various faiths on both sides. Majority on my father's side are Catholic. My mom's side is kind of split. There was a branch of them that were Lutherans, but most of them seem to had been what's called Orthodox. But never had any problem with any of them when I converted, other than them rolling their eyes like, oh, here he is doing his own thing. They just kind of ignore it and move forward. It never was a huge deal. But again, you know, people are individuals. But yeah, disowning someone, regardless of the purpose behind it, disowning someone for spirituality, I think everyone should move past personally. I don't think that's right to do. Family is family. There is Orthodox also. Yes. If churches are being closed because government is sending police because biohazard labs are releasing stuff that they don't know how to stop, then Christians are evil for not stopping them with force. Well, but again, that doesn't speak for all Christians. To me, that's a terrorist activity, right? To create biohazard lab stuff. Are you telling me you genuinely believe that every single Christian church out there has biohazards they're trying to create and spread? I find a hard time believing that you really think that's every single church that's out there. Again, going back to my personal view on it and the point that we should judge people on their actions. That's a criminal act. 100% should be stopped. It is the government's job to do it. The government is supposed to keep the people safe, because if you start taking the laws into your own hand, then we get into anarchy. So should people be involved? Yes, they should be involved in working with local law enforcement if something like that happened and they discovered it. That should not be acceptable. And most Christians that I know would call that bad, evil, and unacceptable. But it's not because it's a Christian act. It's because it's a criminal terrorist act. Yes, LeVay saw it as an archetype. Don't read my previous text. Oh, sorry. Message deleted. Tell people I'm eclectic Christian who also does some Buddhism, Taoism prayers, Wiccan beliefs. I'm also in a coven, but I'm not a witch. So you're your own person. Nothing wrong with that. I've gotten to the point where I've removed labels. I've actually, if you look on my YouTube videos, if you look in history, if you look up what to call yourself, it's an older video, and I'm in the backyard talking about trees, and basically no matter what you call a tree, it's still a tree. So it's not the label that defines us, and it no matter what label you have, it'll never fully define the complexity of the type of person you are. So I don't think we need to call ourselves anything. The only reason to call yourself something specifically if you're doing something like Dave's doing, Dave is following a very specific path, and he's following it as close as he can. So for him, it makes sense to identify and say, I am specifically a Wiccan of this type of path, because it's identifying directly with it, and if you look at that exact path, you'll understand that line of study. But if you branch out, and if you're mixing in other things, you are no longer a specific path. So why call yourself and limit yourself to a specific path? We as humans, as individuals, are seekers. We're always looking and exploring new things. And if we're not reverting and staying with that base core belief system, then that label no longer seems relevant. So many people will throw on a label just because the majority of their path is a certain way. Like, I still have my Mjolnir, which I wear, but I wear my Mjolnir because my family's from Iceland. My mom was literally born in Reykjavik, Iceland, the capital of Iceland. So for me, it's a cultural thing more than it is a spiritual thing. But if I wear it, people instantly associate it with Norse paganism. Yes, I've explored some Norse paganism stuff and some of the New Age reconstruction stuff. I've read some of the stories and sagas, and now that they're more available, because they weren't back in the 90s, I've been looking at folks like Jackson Crawford or William R. Short, and I've bought new books and talked to other individuals, but it's an exploration. It's not the sole defining path that I'm following. So I'm not going to use the label of pagan, heathen, or Norse pagan for myself. It just doesn't feel right. I'm me. So now when I say I moved beyond labels, I'm too busy exploring a variety. And I don't want to confuse people. I don't want to be like, oh, well, I saw this guy Blaze, and he's this, and this is how you do that, because this is what he does. No, this is what I do, and it doesn't fall into one term. But that's just the way I look at it. Shadi Lowe said, when you're blind, it's a blessing to see. That's a light response. That's a lit response. Lit is an, I assume you mean good response, I hope. That was my goal there. Not, like I said, I'm just sharing my opinions. That's what this whole vlog is about, is me sharing ideas to hopefully inspire and encourage people to explore new venues and avenues. Rethink and reassess. That's what I've been doing. I've been rethinking and reassessing everything that I've read or studied. And it's like, I'd thought about the fact that, I mean, I can go into these techniques and these stories and these details about how you do what or why you do it, whether it be a ceremony or a ritual or a practice, but I don't know where a lot of it originated from. I don't know if the source that I read it from is authentic. I don't even know if it's something I necessarily believe in for all of the little details of things that I've studied. And I'm trying to redo that now. I'm trying to look back and see and explore the human experience. What is it as individuals that led us to try to see a greater existence, a divinity, a divine, a creator of some form? What is it out there that has guided us to where we are today? And I'm just trying to let it guide me, you know, trying to see. And I like researching about philosophy and stories. I love researching and reading. It's just fun. And being someone who was seeking at one time and first exploring this stuff, I found great frustration back in the 90s that all I could find were the Llewellyn books. And in most of those, it's like it was repeating the same thing. And I repeat myself in videos for that same reason. Once you get to the basic core of what people are seeking with New Age, there's a similarity between the paths. And then it just becomes down to what do you want to call yourself. And you call yourself that because there's a focus, right? There's a focus on a belief system, on a pantheon, on a way of practicing. But I'm finding that too. I'm finding that a lot of people that practice have a tendency to, if you change the name and the symbol, it looks like a different faith. They all look very similar. Being spiritual, there's a similarity, and it's usually cultural based more than it is religious based. That's just from my observations. But I am at time. I do have a game to get to, as I'd mentioned at the very beginning of the stream. But I really appreciate the turnout. We've had a lot of folks in today. We had a lot of conversation and comments. Really appreciate the support from everyone. Feel free to leave comments on this afterwards. It goes into my live section on my YouTube, and I will definitely catch you in the next one. So may your path be a peaceful and fruitful one. Catch you next time.